And then we'll finish this up really quickly. Problems and mistakes that we make with teenagers. Not being prepared. Poor or no preparation for adolescence. We have to prepare for teenage years. You can't just all of a sudden go, oh my gosh, I've got a 13-year-old. What do I do? You got to start early. There are a lot of things I disagree with James Dobson and Focus on the Family about, but one of the things that Dobson said one day that I really thought was smart was he said, when you have a 12-year-old or 13-year-old who's acting out and you all of a sudden realize, man, we got a problem. We got to do something. He said, that horse has already left the barn. And he's kind of right. That doesn't mean we can't salvage kids or help them at that point. But it means that as a parent, what were you doing those first 12 or 13 years? Were you paying attention? Did you notice anything going on? We've got to get ready for teenagers before they get to be teenagers. That means doing all those things that we're supposed to do when they're little and when they're in elementary school. And learning about what's going to happen when they hit puberty. Learning about what's going to happen when they're 10 and 11 and 12. So that we're at least kind of prepared for it. Chances are they're not ready for it at all. Parents have to be ready for it because your kids won't be. Another problem, as I've mentioned several times, an insecure marriage, a problematic marriage. I don't know that there's anything that hurts a teenager more than seeing his parents' marriage fall apart. It's just devastating. Because teenagers are old enough to understand why. You can't fool them. They tend to get it. And so the best thing you can do, take care of your marriage. One of the biggest problems is a marriage that doesn't work. Teenagers tend to triangulate you and pit you against each other anyway. And if you're already doing that to yourselves, then they're just going to do more and more of it. Lack of structure, thinking that we got to be their friend, being too permissive, being too indulgent. Do you give them freedom? Yes, but you give them freedom with structure. You say, for example, here's an example of structure, freedom, and induction, like Stephen Glenn proposes. I got a 17-year-old, and he's going out for the evening on Friday. So there's a football game. And so I've got several options there. One is I can just impose a curfew. I can just make a rule and say, here's your curfew. Your curfew is always 11:30, period. No flexibility, no decision making. That's your curfew, 11:30, period. Well, most kids, when they have curfews, they push it right up to the limit or they creep right over it. I can do that, and sometimes that works. Sometimes it's a massive failure. Or I can use induction, and I can give him some freedom. So I can say, when he says, I'm going, after the ball game tonight, I'm going to go over to somebody's house. We're going to order pizza and watch something. And I can say, okay, sounds good. When are you going to be home? And let him tell me. Now, if he says, well, I think I'll probably be home by 1:30 or 2, I can just kind of laugh and say, yeah, that's really funny. Tell me again, when do you think you're going to be home? And if he says, I will be home by midnight, then I can say, okay, sounds good to me. If I do that, he has internalized that. He's come up with the rule from inside of him, and he will own it, more likely than not. And he's much more likely to impose that rule on himself, as opposed to fighting against a rule that was imposed on him from the outside. Okay? There's freedom there, but there's some structure, and he's internalizing the discipline. That's what we want. Poor communication is always a problem. I have to tell you, though, sometimes we think teenagers won't listen and teenagers won't talk. Most of the time when that's happening, parents aren't listening either. And when parents are talking, they're talking down to kids, they're criticizing them, they're getting on to them. Parents are just about as guilty of poor communication skills as any 14 or 15-year-old ever was. Parents need to model good communication. Parents need to listen. Parents need to ask good questions, not just tell things. Sometimes kids will tell us things that we never thought they would tell us if we'll just shut up and listen to them. Fear is a problem. Some people are terrified of teenagers, and so when they have teenagers, they're running around like they're just chickens with their head cut off, because they're so disorganized, because they're so scared of making a mistake, or so scared that their kid's going to get pregnant, or so scared that their kid's going to drink, or something like that. Well, of course, we're all scared of those things, but you can't let fear control the way you parent. You got to manage it. You got to be the adult. If there are two people in the room and one of them's 14, he's kind of naturally going to be an idiot. You got to be an adult. You can't act like a 14-year-old. Then we've just got two 14-year-olds trying to solve a problem. We need an adult. Parents have to be the adult. We have to deal with sexual tension. Parents are not good about doing this. You have to realize what's happening to your kids as they become teenagers. They start to feel sexual things. They may feel sexual attraction to people and situations that you would never dream of. We ought to talk about it. We ought to address it. We ought to have those talks, as hard as they may be. You got to do that. Again, somebody's got to be an adult. Parents are the ones that have to be the adults. Deal with sexual issues. This is particularly important in blended families. A 14-year-old boy who has a woman move into his house who is not his mom may feel sexually attracted to her. You got to figure out how to manage those things and deal with them, and don't run from them like they're not there. We have unrealistic expectations about how teenagers are going to be and how adolescence is going to go. We got to get rid of those. And sometimes we misinterpret behavior. Kids have to separate themselves from their parents and their families. Sometimes we think they're being jerks when they're just trying to pull away from us. They're trying to grow up. They're trying to say, I am independent. I have some autonomy. I need to establish my own identity. And we see it as them being rebellious or irritating. Let them do what they need to do without accusing them of being something that they're not. A few more problems. Too many rules. We've talked about that. Don't get caught up in minutia. Have 3 or 4 major rules for your family and live with those. On the other hand, not enough rules is a problem. If you don't have any rules, then you don't have any structure, and then you're messing everything up also. You got to respect a kid. We demand that teenagers respect us, and it irritates the snot out of us when they don't respect us. But very often when we do that, we don't respect them either. We don't treat them with respect. We don't listen to them. We don't value their ideas. We don't care what they think. We even say that to them. I don't care what you think. Well, when we do that, we're just modeling lack of respect, and that doesn't help our kid respect us. Anger. We talked about getting rid of emotion. If your kids are making you mad, then you've just become another adolescent. One of the rules is you got to be the adult. We don't need 2 14-year-olds. We need a 14-year-old and an adult. Get over the anger. Don't let the kids make you mad. If you do that, they've won the battle, and they've brought you down to their level. Using power, problems. Okay? Sometimes we have to do it. I understand that. I've done it. Every parent's done it. It's not very healthy. Taking stuff away. Saying, I'm doing this to you. I'm limiting you. I'm pulling you out of this. I'm telling you you can't do this. Sometimes we have to do it, but it's really problematic. Take the time. Negotiate. Work things out. Figure out other ways rather than just saying, I'm the strongest. I'm the biggest. I have control. Most teenagers don't respond well to that, just like most adults don't respond well to that. Focusing on punishment, not reinforcement. We've already said that. Last thing on this list is the illusion of control. I'll say this and then we'll be done. You're not in charge of your teenager, mostly. So you might as well understand that you're not and begin to deal with that and deal with it honestly with them. As soon as a kid is big enough to walk out of your house, you're not in charge. He can leave. He can open the window and climb out. He can sneak out. When he gets a car, you're really not in charge. You've got to figure out how to get them to internalize that disciplinary process so that they begin to take charge of themselves. When they're out driving around with their friends, you are absolutely not in charge. You like to think that you are, but you're not. They are. That's why we have to internalize discipline. That's why we have to use induction. That's why we have to not try to make them behave based on what happens outside of them, but based on what happens inside of them. Okay, we're going to stop here.